Inner steaks sizzling, her boasting loud about finally banishing the riffraff problem. That's when I stroll up with my ownership papers. The smell of expensive beef mixes with her panic sweat as conversations die. Event fee, $250, I announce coolly, plus $50 per guest. Lakes under new management. Dead silence, then pure chaos. Brenda shrieks extortion, while guests scramble for their cars like roaches when the lights flip on. Coolers tumbling, kids crying, BMW tires squealing on gravel. 6 months of harassment, 17 bogus complaints trying to destroy my electrician's license, all because I didn't fit her community standards. Revenge is a dish best served lakeside. What would you do if your HOA tried to steal access to water you'd used for 20 years? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Bonus points if you've dealt with HOA drama. My name's Derek, and 6 months ago I thought the biggest problem in my life was my recent divorce. Boy, was I wrong. Turns out, dealing with my ex-wife was like playing checkers compared to the 4-dimensional chess match Brenda Whitmore had planned for my life. Let me paint you the picture. I inherited my grandfather's cabin in Pine Ridge, Colorado. Modest 2-bedroom place built in 1962, sitting on 3 acres where the deer outnumber the neighbors. Grandpa Joe used to tell me stories about swimming in that lake every summer since he was a kid, back when the biggest controversy was whether trout fishing was better at dawn or dusk. The morning mist rolling off the water, the smell of pine needles mixing with coffee from my thermos, the satisfying crunch of gravel under work boots on that old dirt path down to the shoreline. This place was my church. I work union electrical. Good honest living, calloused hands, the kind of job where you actually fix things instead of just talking about fixing things. After my ex took half of everything, including my favorite coffee mug, which still stings, this cabin was basically my entire net worth. But here's the thing. I was perfectly happy with that arrangement. My routine was sacred. Wake up at 5:30, stumble to the kitchen, grab coffee strong enough to wake the dead, then shuffle down to the lake for a few laps before the rest of the world started demanding my attention. The water temperature in July feels like liquid silk. In October, it'll make you question your life choices, but in a good way. The lake sits about 100 yards behind my property line. 15 acres of water so clear you can see the rocky bottom 12 feet down. Technically belonged to Ezra Kowalski, this 70-something hermit who'd lived in his cabin on the far shore longer than some trees had been growing. Simple arrangement that worked for 60 years. Ezra owned it. Families with historical access used it respectfully. Everybody minded their own business. You know, like civilized human beings. Then the developers discovered our little slice of paradise. Willowbrook Estates. 43 houses that look like they were designed by someone who'd seen pictures of rich people's homes but never actually lived in one. Each McMansion trying to out-Mediterranean the next, squeezed onto lots that used to be meadow where elk would graze. The smell of fresh asphalt and landscaping chemicals replaced wildflower meadows practically overnight. Every house costs more than I'll make in a decade. Every lawn maintained by crews who show up at 6 a.m. sharp because God forbid anyone see an imperfect blade of grass. The kind of neighborhood where people buy $80,000 cars to drive 3 blocks to Whole Foods. Enter Brenda Whitmore, HOA president, real estate dynamo, and professional life ruiner. Think Real Housewife meets small-town dictator. Blonde hair that defies both gravity and nature, always dressed like she's expecting cameras, drives a BMW X5 that's whiter than her smile and twice as cold. Her house sits on what the marketing brochures called a premium lakefront lot, which sounds impressive until you realize they built a 4,000 square foot monument to mortgage debt without actually owning an inch of lake access. The first time Brenda graced me with her presence, I was dripping lake water and probably resembling a very content wet dog. She materialized on my dock like some suburban succubus, all fake concern and sugar-sweet venom. "Oh, hello. You must be Derek." The click of her designer heels on my weathered wooden planks sounded like a countdown timer. "I'm Brenda Whitmore, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I was hoping we could chat about some liability concerns." The way she said liability made it sound like I was personally responsible for every insurance claim in Colorado. "I'm sure someone with your background understands we have property values to protect," she continued, eyes scanning my modest cabin like she was calculating exactly how much my existence decreased her net worth. Someone with my background. "Lady, I wire the houses that keep your lights on." A week later, I found out exactly what Brenda's concerns looked like. A chain link fence blocking the path my family had used since Eisenhower was president. Game on. Staring at that fence was like watching someone key your car in slow motion. The metal posts gleamed like surgical steel, concrete footings still dark with moisture, and every no trespassing sign positioned with the precision of someone who probably color codes their sock drawer. But here's the thing about being an electrician. 20 years of troubleshooting teaches you that every problem has a solution. You just need to find the right circuit breaker to flip. First stop, Jefferson County Records Office, where hope goes to die under fluorescent lights and the musty smell of decades-old paperwork. After 3 hours of squinting at surveyor maps that looked like they'd been drawn by caffeinated spiders having seizures, I struck gold. The lake, completely separate parcel, owned by Ezra Kowalski, just like I suspected. Brenda's fancy HOA had about as much legal claim to that water as I had to her BMW. But here's where my day got interesting, and not in a good way. Turns out our suburban dictator had been busy little bee. Public records showed she'd already made Ezra an offer, $50,000 for exclusive Willowbrook access rights. The woman moved faster than bad news in a small town. I drove out to Ezra's place, where his cabin made mine look like a penthouse suite. Weathered wood siding, rusty hinges that squeaked like angry mice, surrounded by Douglas firs that had been growing since before skiing was cool. But when the old man opened his door, his eyes were sharp as January wind. "You're Joe's grandson," he said, studying my hands. "Got the same calluses. Your granddaddy helped my father build this place back in '62. That's when the real story came out. Ezra's fighting cancer, the kind that makes medical bills grow faster than wildfire in August. 47,000 in debt and climbing, with insurance companies playing their favorite game of find creative reasons to deny coverage. Brenda's offer would barely keep his head above water, leaving him broke and unable to afford the treatments that were literally keeping him alive. "She talks to me like I'm simple," Ezra told me, his voice carrying the weight of mountain winters. "Keeps saying how people like me don't understand modern property values. People like him." Funny how that phrase kept coming up. Now, I'm no lawyer, but working construction teaches you a thing or two about property rights. I remembered reading somewhere that if you've been using land openly for long enough, the law sometimes recognizes that usage. Sure enough, Colorado's adverse possession laws can grant legal rights after 18 years of continuous, obvious use. My family had been swimming in that lake for 60 years, 3 times longer than required. The path was worn smooth by 6 decades of bare feet and fishing poles. While I was playing amateur legal scholar, Brenda deployed her secret weapon, a security guard who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. "Sorry, man," Bobby apologized, adjusting his radio like it was made of unstable explosives. "Mrs. Whitmore says I gotta keep everyone out. Union job, good benefits, you know how it is." Poor kid was sweating bullets in the mountain air, constantly glancing toward Brenda's house like she might appear with a performance review and a pink slip. That's when I heard it, the electric hum of righteous suburban fury. Brenda's golf cart materialized through the trees like some designer-clad angel of property management, her jewelry catching sunlight like a disco ball of entitlement. "Derek," she called out in that voice that could make sugar taste sour. "Surely you understand that rules are rules. We simply cannot have unauthorized persons creating liability exposure for our residents. Unauthorized persons. Not neighbors, not people, not even trespassers. Unauthorized persons. Like I was some kind of human parking violation. But 20 years of dealing with condescending foremen had trained me for this moment. I just smiled and pulled out my phone, started documenting everything. The click of my camera shutter seemed to hit her nervous system like fingernails on a chalkboard. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" The fake sweetness cracked just a little. "Taking pictures," I said, snapping another shot. "Funny thing about fences, they need permits when they cross property lines. Your beautiful barrier there? It's sitting 3 feet onto public easement land. You know that moment when someone realizes they've been outsmarted by the person they thought was too stupid to matter?" Brenda's face went through more changes than a traffic light having a nervous breakdown. 48 hours later, Jefferson County Code Enforcement showed up with measuring tape and an attitude problem for Brenda. Her fence had to move, and she had exactly 2 days to do it, or start paying daily fines that would make her car payment look like pocket change. Her meltdown was spectacular. Standing there screaming at the county inspector about harassment and corruption while he calmly wrote her citation, her voice rising to frequencies that probably confused the local wildlife. The mountain wind through the pines almost seemed to be laughing. Round 1, working man 1, HOA tyrant 0, but something told me this was just the opening act. If I thought winning round 1 would cool Brenda's jets, I had another thing coming. Apparently, humiliating a control freak in front of county officials is like feeding a gremlin after midnight. Things are about to get a whole lot worse. 3 days post-fence fiasco, my phone rang with news that made my morning coffee taste like liquid regret. Tom Rodriguez, my lawyer buddy who usually calls about fishing trips and football bets, sounded like he'd just watched his truck get repossessed. Derek, we got a problem. Emergency HOA meeting tonight. They're bringing in a sheriff's deputy to discuss vagrant activity and security threats around the lake area. Vagrant activity. That's me, apparently. 60 years of family tradition now classified somewhere between panhandling and armed robbery. I needed intelligence, so I headed to Murphy's Diner where Bobby, the security guard, was drowning his conscience in chocolate pie. The kid looked like he hadn't slept since the fence incident, constantly checking his phone like it might grow teeth and bite him. Rough week? I asked, sliding into his booth. The coffee shop bell jingled as Bobby glanced around like we were conducting a drug deal. Man, she's got me stalking you, he whispered. Photos, timestamps, everything. She wants documentation every time you even look toward the lake. Then he dropped the real bombshell. Brenda had offered him a $1,000 bonus to catch me doing something illegal. She'd been playing amateur photographer with a telephoto lens, hunting for code violations on my property like some suburban paparazzi. She keeps talking about how certain types of people don't understand community standards, Bobby said, then immediately looked like he wanted to disappear into his pie. I'm sorry, man. I need this job, but this ain't right. Certain types of people. Brenda's broken record was getting old fast. That's when I met my secret weapon. Margaret Luca, 68, retired librarian, and the one person in Willowbrook who saw through Brenda's act. Over coffee strong enough to wake the dead, Margaret spilled the neighborhood tea. That woman turned our subdivision into a fascist theme park, Margaret said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Last month, she tried to fine me for the wrong shade of white paint on my mailbox. Wrong shade of white. I didn't even know that was possible. But here's the real juice. Margaret had done her homework. Turns out the Whitmores were drowning in debt faster than concrete boots in deep water. Her husband's restaurant had crashed and burned, leaving them with bills that made my divorce look like a parking ticket. Brenda wasn't just protecting property values. She was fighting for financial survival. She's been promising HOA members that exclusive lake access could boost home values by 20%, Margaret explained. For her house, that's almost $100,000 in paper equity. Suddenly, everything clicked. This wasn't about community standards. This was about cold, hard cash dressed up in suburban righteousness. That night's emergency meeting was pure theater. Deputy Martinez showed up looking thrilled as a root canal patient, while Brenda performed her greatest hits about neighborhood security threats. The assembled homeowners looked like they'd rather be getting colonoscopies. We're dealing with aggressive behavior, possible substance abuse, and complete disregard for our community values, Brenda announced, her voice carrying across the community center like a fire alarm. Substance abuse. Because apparently my morning coffee ritual qualified as suspicious activity in Brenda's paranoid universe. She'd even circulated a petition, 37 signatures demanding to ban unauthorized lake access by non-residents. People who probably would have signed a petition to outlaw Tuesday if she'd asked with enough fake sweetness. But Margaret wasn't just sitting there looking pretty. While Brenda delivered her performance, Margaret's phone captured every word, including the moment when our HOA president admitted she wanted to eliminate the riffraff problem to protect our investments. Finally, some honesty about her real motivations. 2 days later, Brenda escalated to full nuclear warfare. She called the state licensing board with a formal complaint about my electrical work, claiming I'd done unpermitted modifications to my own property. I found myself sitting in an office that smelled like burned coffee and bureaucratic despair, getting grilled by inspectors like I was running an underground wire smuggling operation. Carl Washington, the state inspector, spent 3 hours examining every outlet, every switch, every junction box in my cabin. When he finished, he looked almost annoyed. "Your work exceeds current code requirements," he said, closing his clipboard with a snap. "Whoever filed this complaint either doesn't know electrical from plumbing or they're deliberately wasting state resources." But Carl pulled me aside as he was leaving. "Off the record? Someone's targeting you systematically. This was the most thorough false complaint I've seen in 20 years. Watch your back." That's when I realized Brenda wasn't just playing dirty. She was playing for keeps. And I was about to find out exactly how far she was willing to go. Carl's warning turned out to be as accurate as a Swiss watch, and twice as ominous. Within a week, Brenda launched a harassment campaign that would have impressed a military strategist. if military strategists specialized in suburban psychological warfare and had questionable taste in bottle blonde highlights. She went after my livelihood with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. 3 separate job sites received anonymous tips about unlicensed electrical work. My foreman at the hospital renovation pulled me aside, looking like someone had told him his retirement fund was invested in Monopoly money. "Derek, we got state inspectors crawling over this place like ants at a picnic. Everything's clean, but it's burning time and money we don't have." The smell of fresh drywall dust mixed with my growing realization that Brenda was trying to destroy my professional reputation one phone call at a time. In the trades, word spreads faster than wildfire in August. One rumor about shoddy work can kill a career deader than last year's Christmas tree. But I'd learned patience from 20 years of electrical troubleshooting. Sometimes you have to let a system reveal its flaws before you can fix them. So instead of losing my mind, I did what drives control freaks absolutely crazy. I stayed calm and documented everything. My morning lake visits became scientific expeditions. Every swim photographed with timestamps, GPS coordinates, and enough documentation to satisfy a federal investigation. My grandfather had taught me something about property rights that most people never learn. If you use land openly and continuously for decades, the law eventually recognizes your claim. Colorado's prescriptive easement laws protect rights earned through consistent use, and my family had been swimming in that lake since before Brenda was born. While building my legal fortress one photo at a time, I spent more hours with Ezra, bringing groceries and fixing repairs around his weathered cabin. The old man's health was declining, but his memory stayed sharp as December wind. Working on his sagging dock, hammer taps echoing across the water like a woodpecker with OCD, he shared stories that went back 70 years. "Your grandpa and my daddy built that fire pit in '63, he said, pointing to stones worn smooth by decades of use. They'd sit there evenings, sharing beer and complaining about taxes. Good men who understood what really mattered. That's when Ezra hit me with news that changed everything. His medical bills had exploded to $73,000, but that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was what he showed me next. A manila envelope hidden in his kitchen drawer filled with papers that made my electrician's brain start calculating numbers like a slot machine hitting jackpot. "Found these cleaning out Daddy's old filing cabinet," Ezra said. "Some oil company paid us lease money back in the 50s and 60s for mineral rights. Stopped when the company went belly up, but I never understood what it meant." I stared at documents dated 1958, showing lease payments for exploration rights to natural gas deposits under the lake. The original company had dissolved in 1987, meaning the rights reverted to whoever owned the land. And sitting right there in black and white were geological survey reports indicating significant recoverable reserves. My mind raced through possibilities while my hands shook slightly holding papers that could change everything. In today's natural gas market, with Colorado's pipeline infrastructure and new extraction technologies, those deposits could be worth millions. Not thousands, millions. "Ezra," I said carefully, "have you shown these to anyone else?" "Nope. Brenda keeps calling about that partnership deal. But I've been avoiding her. Something about that woman sets my teeth on edge. Thank God for small favors. Brenda was so focused on surface rights and lake access that she'd completely missed the real treasure buried beneath the water. Meanwhile, my intelligence network was paying dividends. Margaret had recorded another HOA meeting where Brenda's mask slipped completely. Over coffee that could strip paint, Margaret played back audio of our suburban dictator discussing demographic management and maintaining property value integrity. She actually used the phrase, "keeping out undesirable elements," Margaret reported, her librarian instincts offended by such blatant prejudice. Woman doesn't even pretend to hide her discrimination anymore. But Brenda's desperation was reaching new heights of crazy. Bobby confided that she'd been conducting surveillance on my property like some discount private investigator, photographing everything from my truck to my electrical meter. "She's got files on you thicker than a phone book," Bobby whispered during our weekly diner confessions. "Even called the IRS, claiming you're hiding income from side jobs." That almost made me snort coffee through my nose. The IRS investigating a union guy who reports every penny and saves receipts like they're family heirlooms? Brenda clearly didn't understand working-class survival tactics. The breaking point came when she hosted her lakeside barbecue. Designer furniture scattered across Ezra's shoreline like she'd already won. Expensive steaks sizzled while she loudly announced plans for exclusive community amenities and proper access management. But sitting in my truck that evening, holding Ezra's mineral rights documents, I realized Brenda had no idea what she was really fighting for. Time to show her exactly how much this lake was worth. Holding those yellowed papers in Ezra's kitchen felt like discovering buried treasure in your grandmother's attic. Except this treasure was sitting under 15 acres of lake water, and I was probably the only person within 50 miles who understood what I was looking at. The mineral lease documents told a story that would make Brenda's designer handbag collection look like spare change. Back in 1958, Rocky Mountain Energy Corporation had paid Ezra's father $500 a year for exploration and extraction rights to natural gas deposits beneath the lake. The company went belly up during the 80s oil crash, and all rights reverted to whoever owned the land. The smell of Ezra's decades-old coffee mixed with my rising excitement as I studied geological surveys that read like a roadmap to financial freedom. These weren't maybe possibly estimates. We were talking documented, drillable natural gas reserves worth potentially millions in today's market. I spent 3 sleepless days researching Colorado mineral rights law, pipeline infrastructure, and extraction regulations. Turns out our little mountain lake sat perfectly positioned near existing pipeline networks, and new environmental standards actually made small-scale extraction more profitable than ever. Conservative estimates put recoverable value between $2 and $3 million over 20 years. My hands shook like a caffeinated chihuahua as I ran the numbers. Ezra could fund his cancer treatment, pay off every debt, and live like a king for the rest of his days. His nephew Marcus wouldn't have to sell the family homestead. And if I played this right, I could secure permanent lake access while helping a man who'd shown my family nothing but kindness for 60 years. But here's where my conscience decided to crash the party like an uninvited relative at Thanksgiving dinner. Ezra had no clue what he was sitting on. The old man was facing foreclosure over 73 grand in medical bills while unknowingly owning mineral rights worth more than Brenda's entire McMansion. I could buy those rights for peanuts, let him think he was getting charity, and walk away wealthy enough to buy out the whole subdivision just to spite everyone. The moral weight of that opportunity sat on my chest heavier than a truck transmission. This wasn't some faceless corporation or government bureaucrat. This was a sick old man who'd treated my grandfather like family. So I made the choice that probably cost me a fortune, but guaranteed I could look at myself in the mirror without cringing. "Ezra," I said, spreading the geological surveys across his kitchen table like we were planning a military campaign, "you need to know what you really own here." For the next hour, I explained mineral rights, natural gas extraction, and current market values in terms that made sense to a man who'd survived 7 decades of mountain winters without losing his marbles. Ezra listened with the patience of someone who'd learned that life's biggest surprises usually come wrapped in boring paperwork. When I finished, he sat quiet for a moment that stretched longer than a bad country song, staring at documents that had just transformed from family memorabilia into life-changing opportunity. "So what you're telling me," he said slowly, "is that Brenda Whitmore's been trying to steal surface rights to land sitting on top of a couple million in gas deposits? That's exactly what I'm telling you." Ezra erupted in laughter that shook his entire cabin. Not bitter irony, but pure, delighted amazement at the universe's twisted sense of humor. "That woman's been calling twice a week, lecturing me about how people like me don't understand modern property values," he wheezed, slapping the table with papers worth more than her house, car, and jewelry combined. Turns out she's the one who can't see past her own nose. We spent the afternoon crafting a partnership. Ezra, 60%, me, 40%, mineral rights leased to legitimate extraction companies. The income would fund his medical care and leave plenty left over to tell Brenda Whitmore exactly where she could stick her community standards. But first, we had to buy this lake before she discovered what we knew. Game time. You know that scene in heist movies where the team plans the perfect crime while dramatic music plays in the background? Well, this felt exactly like that, except instead of robbing banks, we were about to financially ambush a suburban tyrant who'd been making my life hell for 6 months. First order of business, assembling my Ocean's 11 mountain style. Tom Rodriguez traded his usual diet of fender benders for crash courses in mineral rights law, spending sleepless nights surrounded by legal texts thicker than Colorado phone books. The smell of burnt coffee and highlighter ink filled his office as he transformed from small-town lawyer into resource extraction specialist. "Derek, this is either brilliant or completely insane," Tom said, rubbing eyes redder than brake lights. "But if we pull this off, you'll own the most expensive swimming hole west of the Mississippi." Margaret Luca became our master spy, attending HOA meetings with the dedication of a foreign correspondent in a war zone. Her decades of librarian detective work proved perfect training for corporate espionage disguised as neighborhood gossip. The woman could extract information from public records like a surgeon removing tumors. "Brenda's calling emergency meetings twice weekly now," Margaret reported over coffee strong enough to dissolve spoons. "She's promising residents that lake access is imminent and property values will skyrocket. The desperation is practically leaking through her Botox." Carl Washington became our unofficial regulatory guide. 25 years of navigating bureaucratic maze had taught him exactly which forms mattered and which officials could expedite permits. He couldn't officially help, but he could accidentally leave environmental compliance guides on my truck dashboard. Even Marcus, Ezra's nephew, transformed from reluctant caretaker into enthusiastic business partner after nearly choking on his California coffee when we explained his inheritance. The poor guy had flown in expecting a garage sale, only to discover he was sitting on a geological gold mine. "I came here to sell Uncle Ezra's fishing cabin," Marcus said, staring at mineral surveys like they were alien hieroglyphics. "Now I'm learning about natural gas extraction and LLC tax advantages. My therapist is going to have a field day with this." Our financial strategy required creativity that would have impressed NASA engineers. I mortgaged my cabin for $45,000 as down payment, using Ezra's mineral rights as collateral for additional financing through specialty lenders who understood resource deals. We structured everything through Pine Ridge Lake Partners LLC, because nothing protects you from vindictive HOA lawsuits like proper business incorporation. Here's something they don't teach in high school economics. LLCs are financial force fields. They protect your personal assets while providing tax flexibility and professional credibility. When Brenda inevitably tried to sue us for ruining her neighborhood, she'd be attacking a properly structured business entity, not individual bank accounts. The master plan unfolded in 3 phases like a perfectly choreographed dance. Phase 1, shock and awe purchase at a price Brenda couldn't match. Phase 2, lease mineral rights to legitimate extraction companies with environmental safeguards that would satisfy even the tree huggers. Phase 3, develop premium recreation facilities that generated steady revenue while maintaining natural beauty. Revenue projections made my electrician's calculator smoke with excitement. $200,000 annually from mineral leases, plus $75,000 from day use fees. We weren't just buying water rights. We were creating a sustainable business that would fund Ezra's medical care and give me enough financial independence to tell future HOAs exactly where they could stick their architectural guidelines. Meanwhile, I spent evenings installing security cameras disguised as routine maintenance, the scent of pine sap mixing with anticipation as I mounted weatherproof surveillance around the lake perimeter. Professional boundary signs came next, tasteful wooden posts that established ownership without resembling military checkpoints. The permit pricing system took weeks to perfect. $50 for individual day use seemed reasonable, enough to limit crowds while generating income. Special events like weddings or corporate retreats would command premium rates. $250 felt appropriate for groups wanting exclusive access. Something told me Brenda's future barbecues would fall into that category. Our intelligence network operated smoother than high-end bourbon. Margaret recorded every HOA meeting, documenting Brenda's increasingly frantic promises about imminent lake access. Bobby provided early warning about his employer's schemes, and Carl monitored any new harassment complaints filed against me. The environmental partnership proved unexpectedly valuable. Colorado offered grants for wildlife habitat preservation, and our lake supported protected waterfowl species. Partnering with state fish and wildlife could provide tax benefits while generating positive publicity for our conservation through responsible recreation model. But the sweetest part of our plan was the timing. We scheduled closing for Friday afternoon, when Brenda would be showing overpriced houses to unsuspecting buyers. All paperwork pre-approved, funds in escrow, immediate possession upon signature. By the time she realized what happened, we'd already be posting private property signs. Thursday night, I sat on my deck with a beer, watching loons call across water that would soon belong to us. The irony was delicious. Brenda had spent months trying to steal access from a working-class electrician, never realizing she was fighting over the most valuable piece of real estate in the county. Tomorrow, everything changed. Time to show Little Miss HOA president what real power looked like. If I thought Brenda was desperate before, I clearly underestimated what a cornered suburban dictator would do when her financial survival hung by threads thinner than her fake eyelashes. What happened next made her previous harassment look like a friendly disagreement over mailbox colors. It started when she somehow figured out I'd been meeting with Ezra regularly. Tuesday morning at Murphy's Diner, I'm trying to enjoy eggs that didn't deserve the drama about to unfold when she materializes like a designer-clad demon, sliding uninvited into my booth. "Derek," she said, leaning forward with that practiced concern expression, "we need to discuss your inappropriate relationship with Mr. Kowalski." The smell of bacon grease mixed with her perfume, something that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill, as she deployed her fake sympathy voice. "I'm worried you might be taking advantage of an elderly man in a vulnerable condition." Taking advantage. This from a woman who'd been circling Ezra like a vulture in Versace, trying to steal his property for coffee money. But Brenda had been busy playing detective with someone else's credit card. Within days, a private investigator had excavated every financial detail of my divorce, my recent money troubles, and probably my grocery receipts from last Christmas. The information spread through Willowbrook faster than gossip at a church picnic. "Did you know Derek's facing serious financial pressure?" she mentioned casually at HOA meetings, according to Margaret's spy reports. "Suddenly very interested in befriending poor Mr. Kowalski right when he needs to sell property. Quite a coincidence." Then Brenda crossed a line that would have made loan sharks uncomfortable. She actually drove to the cancer center and confronted Ezra during his weekly chemo treatments, bringing 2 HOA witnesses like she was serving a warrant. "She stood right there in the treatment room," Ezra told me later, his voice shaking with exhaustion and fury, "telling me how you were manipulating my judgment for financial gain. Had the nerve to lecture a sick man about being gullible while poison dripped into my veins. Hospital security escorting a HOA president for harassing cancer patients. Even for Brenda, that was Olympic-level awful that impressed nobody and horrified everyone with functioning consciences. Meanwhile, my professional life became a bureaucratic hurricane designed by someone with serious control issues and unlimited time to make phone calls. The state licensing board received complaints about my work that got more creative each week. Someone reported my truck as abandoned commercial equipment on public roads. Code enforcement got anonymous tips about unpermitted structures that had been grandfathered since Johnson was president. "This is systematic warfare," Carl Washington warned me after the 5th inspection in 10 days. "Someone's working through every agency that might regulate anything you do, filing complaints like it's their full-time job." The worst part was watching contractors get nervous about hiring the electrician whose name kept appearing in state investigations, even though every inspection cleared me completely. The smell of worry mixed with concrete dust as project managers pulled me aside, asking if I was having legal problems that might affect their timelines. But Brenda's final gambit shocked even my cynical expectations. She ambushed Marcus outside Ezra's cabin, waving a cashier's check like she was performing an exorcism with money. $85,000 cash today, she announced, according to Marcus's stunned phone call. Plus $10,000 extra for your personal inconvenience. Personal inconvenience, bribery disguised as travel expense compensation. She kept insisting Uncle Ezra was being conned by predators, Marcus reported, sounding like he'd witnessed an alien abduction. Then she hands me this check and says all I need to do is convince him to sign papers she'd already prepared. That's when Marcus dropped the bombshell that made my blood freeze. Brenda had actually forged preliminary sale documents, complete with signatures she claimed showed Ezra's intent to sell. She'd been preparing to close a deal based on fabricated paperwork. "The documents looked official," Marcus said. "If I didn't know better, I might have believed Uncle Ezra had already agreed to sell." Forgery, elder abuse, harassment, bribery, and fraud wrapped in suburban entitlement that would have impressed organized crime bosses. This woman had escalated from petty HOA tyranny to actual felonies without missing a beat. But here's the beautiful irony that kept me warm at night. While Brenda was burning through her husband's maxed-out credit cards on private investigators and illegal schemes, she still had zero clue about the mineral rights gold mine sitting under that lake. Her $85,000 bribe looked generous compared to earlier lowballing, but she was essentially offering lunch money for the geological equivalent of winning Powerball. Thursday evening, I got the call that changed everything. Tom Rodriguez, voice tight with excitement and disbelief. "Derek, we need to move fast. Brenda's lawyer just filed an emergency injunction claiming Ezra lacks mental capacity for major financial decisions. They're trying to stop tomorrow's closing." Suddenly, Friday wasn't just closing day anymore. It was D-Day. Thursday night's emergency injunction hit like a lightning bolt through a clear sky. At 11:47 p.m., Tom's call delivered news that made my blood pressure spike higher than Colorado mountain peaks. They're claiming Ezra has dementia, Tom said, his voice vibrating with barely controlled rage. Brenda's hired gun filed papers stating he's mentally incompetent to make major financial decisions. They want court-appointed guardianship to review all his affairs. Mental incompetence. The woman who'd been terrorizing a cancer patient was now claiming the sharp-minded old man who could recite fishing stories from 1963 lacked capacity to manage his own life. Friday morning felt like suiting up for the Battle of Gettysburg. I arrived at Rocky Mountain Title to find Brenda's legal army already fortified like they were defending Fort Knox. James Crawford, her $500 per hour hired gun, commanded the conference table like a general planning nuclear war. Recent evidence suggests Mr. Kowalski suffers cognitive decline consistent with chemotherapy-induced mental impairment, Crawford announced, reading from documents that probably cost more than my truck. Our psychiatric evaluation indicates diminished capacity for decisions of this financial magnitude. Psychiatric evaluation. Some rent-a-doctor who'd probably examined Ezra for 5 minutes and pronounced him unfit based on Brenda's coaching. But here's where desperation made Brenda sloppy. While she was playing courtroom games, Marcus had orchestrated something beautiful. Independent cognitive assessment by Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Jefferson County's own elder care specialist who couldn't be bought, bribed, or bullied. The smell of recycled air and nervous tension filled the title office as Dr. Mitchell delivered her verdict with scientific precision. Mr. Kowalski demonstrates complete cognitive function appropriate for his age and education. Memory, reasoning, and decision-making capacity all test within normal parameters. Crawford's complexion cycled through more colors than a mood ring in a microwave. Furthermore, Dr. Mitchell continued with the authority of someone who'd spent 30 years evaluating mental capacity. Mr. Kowalski expressed clear understanding of this transaction, its financial implications, and his personal motivations for proceeding. Zero evidence of coercion or diminished judgment. That's when the star of our show made his entrance. Ezra rolled into the office in a wheelchair pushed by Marcus, looking like a mountain patriarch temporarily trading flannel for legal warfare. Chemo had weakened his body, but his eyes burned with clarity that could cut diamonds. "Miss Whitmore," Ezra said, his voice carrying 7 decades of mountain authority. "You've spent months treating me like some addled old fool you could manipulate with pocket change and condescending smiles." The conference room went silent enough to hear heartbeats. "Now you want some judge to declare me mentally incompetent because I refuse to hand over my family's property to someone who thinks people like me are too stupid to understand what we own." Patricia Vance, the title officer, looked like she was witnessing a nature documentary where the gazelle suddenly grew fangs and started chasing the lions. But Brenda wasn't surrendering without unleashing every weapon in her arsenal. As Ezra's trembling but determined hand moved across the signature pages, she deployed her nuclear option. "This is criminal fraud," she announced to anyone within shouting distance. "I'm filing charges for elder abuse, conspiracy, and deliberate exploitation of a vulnerable adult." That's when Marcus smiled like a poker player revealing 4 aces and pressed play on his phone recording from Tuesday's bribery scene. Brenda's voice filled the office with crystal clarity. $85,000 cash today plus $10,000 for your personal inconvenience. Just convince the old man to sign papers I've already prepared with his forged signature. The silence that followed was so profound you could have heard snowflakes landing on the parking lot outside. Crawford started collecting documents faster than a card dealer after someone got caught cheating. My client was merely offering fair market value for legitimate property acquisition. "Fair market value," I said, speaking for the first time since entering this legal thunderdome. "For property containing mineral rights worth potentially $3 million. The expression on Brenda's face was absolutely priceless, like someone who'd just discovered they'd been trading Picassos for grocery coupons. At exactly 3:47 p.m. Mountain Time, Ezra's pen completed the final signature transferring lake ownership to Pine Ridge Lake Partners, LLC. That scratching sound was the death knell of 6 months of suburban tyranny. But our defeated dictator wasn't finished with the theatrics. As we walked toward the exit with our deed in hand, she was already speed dialing what sounded like every regulatory agency in Colorado. "This conspiracy won't stand," she shrieked after us, her voice cracking like ice under spring pressure. "I'll destroy you all in court, you manipulative criminals." "Ma'am," I replied, patting the folder containing our ownership papers. "You just tried that. How'd it work out for you?" We drove straight to our lake, where I had the distinct pleasure of installing the first official signage. Private property, Pine Ridge Lake Partners, LLC, day use permits required, $250 special events. The sound of Brenda's BMW engine screaming in the distance was sweeter than any victory song ever written. But something told me our suburban war was about to become very, very public. Monday morning arrived with mountain air so crisp it practically sparkled, promising the kind of peaceful day where the biggest drama would be choosing between coffee or tea. Instead, it delivered the most spectacular public meltdown in Pine Ridge history, complete with cameras, badges, and enough entertainment value to fuel social media for months. I was installing our new permit kiosk, a classy wooden station with laminated pricing and usage rules, when the familiar electric whine of Brenda's golf cart announced incoming trouble. But this wasn't a reconnaissance mission. This was a full-scale invasion. 23 Willowbrook residents marched down to their lake like an army of entitled tourists, armed with folding chairs, designer coolers, and the righteous fury of people who'd been promised amenities that never existed. The smell of expensive sunscreen mixed with suburban outrage as they began setting up camp on our pristine shoreline. "Ignore those illegal signs," Brenda commanded her troops like Napoleon addressing the Grande Armée. "This lake belongs to our community, and we're taking back what's rightfully ours, rightfully theirs." After 6 months of harassment, bribery attempts, and elder abuse, she was still claiming ownership of water that had never belonged to Willowbrook Estates. I pulled out my phone and started recording as families began unloading beach umbrellas worth more than my monthly grocery budget. "Folks, this is private property now. Day-use permits are $50 per person, payable at the kiosk." "We don't pay extortion fees to con artists," Brenda declared, her voice echoing across the water like a bullhorn filled with pure entitlement. "This community lake belongs to Willowbrook residents." That's when Margaret Luca materialized like a silver-haired avenging angel, carrying a folding chair and coffee that could probably strip paint. The sight of their own neighbor supporting the enemy caused visible confusion among Brenda's invasion force. "Actually, Brenda," Margaret announced loud enough for everyone to hear, "it doesn't belong to us. Never did. Derek bought it fair and square after you tried to cheat Mr. Kowalski out of millions." Millions. That word rippled through the crowd like electricity, heads turning, whispered conversations starting. People began checking phones, probably Googling property records and mineral rights for the first time in their lives. But Brenda had invested too much pride in potential felony charges to retreat gracefully. "Margaret, you've been brainwashed by these manipulators. Can't you see they're exploiting a vulnerable cancer patient?" "That vulnerable cancer patient just became a multi-millionaire," Margaret replied sweetly. "Funny how mineral rights work when people actually understand property law." Perfect timing brought Jessica Martinez from the Pine Ridge Gazette, arriving with a photographer and the kind of notebook that meant someone was about to become infamous. Word had spread about the lake war, and local media smelled a story with viral potential. "Mrs. Whitmore," Jessica called out, "can you comment on allegations that you attempted to bribe Mr. Kowalski's family and forged legal documents?" Brenda's face cycled through more expressions than a mime having a seizure. "Those recordings were taken completely out of context. I was offering legitimate business consultation. The audio includes you discussing papers with forged signatures. Care to elaborate?" That's when Brenda committed the error that transformed local news into internet gold. She lunged for Jessica's camera, shrieking about fake news harassment, while her designer sunglasses flew into the lake like expensive frisbees. The photographer captured everything, Brenda grabbing for equipment, Jessica professionally stepping back, 23 residents suddenly realizing their HOA president was having a complete public breakdown that would probably end up on YouTube. "You can't film on private property without permission," Brenda screamed, her perfect hair now looking like she'd been electrocuted by her own rage. "Actually, ma'am," I said calmly, "I gave them permission. It's my lake now." Gravel crunched under official tires as Deputy Martinez arrived, responding to dispatch reports of trespassing and media assault. The crowd suddenly found their shoes absolutely fascinating. "What's the situation here?" Deputy Martinez asked, surveying scattered beach equipment and one woman who appeared to be vibrating with pure fury. "Trespassing on private property," I explained, showing our deed and permit documentation. "I've offered legal day-use access, but some individuals refuse to comply with posted regulations." Deputy Martinez reviewed our paperwork with professional thoroughness. "Property ownership is legitimate," he announced to the assembled crowd. "Anyone remaining without permits faces trespassing charges." Brenda's army began evacuating faster than tourists fleeing a hurricane, suddenly remembering urgent appointments elsewhere. But our suburban dictator wasn't surrendering without one final performance. "This is criminal extortion," she declared to her departing supporters. "Arrest these con artists for price gouging and elder abuse." Deputy Martinez looked at her with the patience of someone who'd handled entitled residents before. "Ma'am, private property owners can set any access fees they choose. That's basic property rights." The perfect justice moment came when Brenda stormed toward her golf cart, only to realize she'd parked on private property and technically owed $50 for vehicle access. "That'll be $50 for your parking permit," I called out as cameras rolled. "I'll see you in hell first," she screamed, climbing into her cart. "Ma'am," I replied with a smile that felt like Christmas morning, "you've been living in hell for months. Welcome to my paradise." 6 months later, I'm watching the sunrise paint our lake in shades of liquid gold while Ezra teaches his great-nephew to cast a fishing line from the same dock where my grandfather taught me 60 years ago. The circle of life continuing, just as it should. The immediate aftermath of Brenda's viral meltdown was swift and brutal. Jessica's article, complete with photos of our suburban dictator attacking journalists, exploded across social media faster than gossip at a church social. HOA Karen attacks reporter over lake she never owned got shared over 100,000 times, turning Brenda Whitmore into the internet's favorite example of entitled neighbor behavior gone completely wrong. Within 2 weeks, our harassment lawsuit resulted in a restraining order and $25,000 in damages, money that helped fund our first conservation improvements. The criminal charges for elder abuse and document forgery earned Brenda 6 months probation and 200 hours of community service cleaning public bathrooms, which seemed appropriately humbling for someone who'd spent months treating working people like dirt. Facing foreclosure and social media infamy, the Whitmores fled to Denver where nobody recognized them from viral videos. Their McMansion sold for 60% of its original price, becoming a cautionary tale about the cost of suburban tyranny. But our real victory was what grew from the ashes of their defeat. Pine Ridge Lake transformed into Colorado's premier example of conservation through community partnership. The natural gas extraction generated $180,000 annually with zero environmental impact, funding Ezra's complete medical care while creating an endowment that protects the lake forever. State wildlife partnerships brought $75,000 in habitat grants, restoring wetlands that hadn't existed since the 1940s. Our day-use permit system became a model studied by other communities. $50 individual access kept crowds manageable while generating $95,000 yearly. Premium event bookings averaged $400 per reservation, with wedding waiting lists extending 2 years ahead.